as you come in, if you would like to put your name and where you're joining from in the chat, just to introduce yourself, that would be great. But as I say, we'll give it another minute or two, and then we'll get rolling. Welcome, folks, and yeah, thanks for putting your names and locations in the chat. That helps everybody know who's here. And I'm going to give it one more minute. Don't want to spend too much of your evening here. See plenty of familiar names here and some new ones. Always good. Okay, it's 7:03. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Dave Sly, Conservation Director for Wild Virginia, and here we're here to talk about PFAS. But first, I want to lay some give you some background information. First of all, just so you know, this program is being recorded. So if you're a masochist and you want to watch it again later, that's great. Or even better, if you want to share it with somebody who you think would be interested. As I say, a lot of you have introduced yourself in chat, which is great. If you haven't already, feel free to do that. As I'm going through the presentation, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of them as we can by the end. And we will send a follow-up email within the next couple of days, giving you some links and additional information about what you're hearing here. And you can always afterwards contact us with questions if we can help. Just a little note from our sponsor, a little background on Wild Virginia if you're not familiar with us. This PFAS and our water quality campaign is one of the things we do, but we also are very active in habitat connectivity here in Virginia, one of the leading organizations working on that. We've been very active in the Mountain Valley Pipeline and in other pipeline fights. And we have this program we're called our Clean Water Advocates program that just started last year, getting ready to train the second class of advocates, nearly 25 folks who are going to be working with us. Anyhow, now that you're connected with us, if you weren't before, you'll get our emails, and please follow us and look out for other programs too. So just to give you a start as to what I really want to get across tonight, even if you only got this far, this gives you what I want to get across. First, that when it comes to PFAS that's being released to the environment in Virginia, to our water bodies, and sometimes to the land, there's really very little information as to what that is or where it is happening with this PFAS. And that's unfortunate. Part of the reason is that the Virginia DEQ, which is supposed to regulate all the wastewater discharges and other kinds of activities that can release PFAS to the environment, is not requiring sampling, is not doing the kinds of things they need to do to get the information, and they're not reporting it on a wide scale. while Virginia did a fair amount of work, both through DEQ and through some other parties, to start gathering information about PFAS's release to the environment. But DEQ did not make that easy, and we think it's just important to start getting it out there. As more information comes along, we'll continue to make sure that that is available too. What we have seen, and again, it's only a minor piece of what we know could be out there, is that there are quite a few serious pollution releases of PFAS around the state, specifically from these wastewater discharges. And then finally, I'll say that while Virginia is going to release a fuller report where we can not only include what we're talking about tonight, but a lot of other details that we just can't get in an hour. And we're going to give you some ideas on how you can participate and try to push to get more information and better controls. So if you're not familiar with PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, just some very basic parts of the information, that they're synthetic chemicals. They've been produced since about the 1940s in all kinds of products, many things that we really value, like, weather-resistant clothing, firefighting foam, things that we felt were really important, that were developed, that had great benefits to society, but then we also found that they have some pretty serious harmful effects. PFAS includes thousands of forms, thousands of separate kinds of chemicals, some of which down at the bottom is some of the ones that most people or more people have heard of, but there are many, many of them. And the scary things, two of the most scary things, are that at very, very small levels, they can cause serious problems to humans, to wildlife, and that they accumulate. So they don't just come and then leave quickly. Once they get in our bodies or the bodies of fish that we might eat, they build up over time. And we are frankly, everywhere we look, when we take a harder look at places in the environment, our water supplies, other areas, we continue to find them more and more. So it's very problematic, and it's a big problem. We can't solve overnight getting rid of the products that have this stuff, figuring out how to clean up all the water supplies and the groundwater and all these other places where we might find problems. But we started kind of at what we say is the upstream end of this thing, that even though we've got to deal with water supplies that are already contaminated, even though we got to figure out on a broad scale how we deal with these products and with these wastes, we shouldn't be putting more of those substances in the environment if we can help it. And we have a ready way to at least stop some of those sources. There's a system under the Clean Water Act and under Virginia state law where anybody who wants to discharge wastewaters and pollution to our waters has to get a permit. The state and the federal regulators and EPA have a role in making sure that those permits actually do control pollution and stop the kind of threats that we face from PFAS. So we feel like it makes sense to try to stop at least the set of threats that are presented by wastewater discharges. And since there's already authority and a process to do that, it makes sense to grab hold of that. That doesn't mean we won't pay attention to other possibilities, but it's one that just makes the most sense right off the bat. So how did we go down this kind of rabbit hole to figure out, where all this stuff is coming from and which dischargers might have these materials? Well, first of all, we just got a hint that some municipal wastewater operators, some localities and others out there had actually gone and sampled their wastewater discharges and gotten some data. So we just said, hey, we hear you got some data. Can you help us? Will you give it to us? And very quickly, a number of those folks did. Finding that that was available, then the next thought was, well, let's go to the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and see what they know. If folks are out there measuring these chemicals in their discharges, surely the DEQ is paying attention to that and they can help us. Well, they weren't helpful. Last fall, when I first started approaching them and asking them, you know, are you looking at this? Do the people who are drafting and issuing these discharge permits, do they know if there's PFAS in the discharges that they're dealing with? And frankly, DEQ gave me the runaround and didn't give me anything helpful. Well, later we figured out that DEQ had distributed a survey back in 2022 to ask for this specific kind of information. And although they got a fairly poor response from people, they did get a bunch of information. But they hadn't bothered to tell us about that when I first started asking. We did finally get it through a Freedom of Information Act request, and that's part of what I want to talk about tonight. But we're continuing to make requests, especially from local government bodies and those municipal authorities, because again, they've been helpful so far. So before we talk about what has been found as far as what's in these dischargers, one question, of course, is, you know, if you find it, is that a problem? And how much is a problem? Whether it's in that discharge, in the water that's, you know, in your reservoir, your drinking water plant, or what? And the simple answer is that if you're finding PFAS in measurable, detectable levels in our waters, in state waters, or if you're discharging it to those state waters in significant amounts, then that's a real concern because, as I said earlier, very, very small amounts can be dangerous, and small amounts in that water may well be leading to significant concentrations in the fish that we want to eat. Another thing is that the state has a regulation called an anti-degradation policy that says if you got good water quality, you don't continue to pump more pollution into it. You don't add things that are not there already to cause contamination. So we consider that if there are detectable levels of PFAS, then we're concerned about it. To give a little scale, and these EPA drinking water standards that were released not long ago, again, these apply to the drinking water source. Whoever provides water that comes through your tap, they're supposed to be held to these kinds of levels. You'll see the units there, parts per trillion, or nanograms per liter. That is a very, very, very small amount. I've seen different illustrations, something like a drop in a swimming pool or something like that, but that just tells you the scale. So when EPA set these, what they call final maximum contaminant levels for a couple of those things, PFOA and PFAS, they said 4 parts per trillion because that's essentially what they can measure. But what they really consider safe, if you will, for those two chemicals is none, because those chemicals are considered to be likely carcinogens. And it's been acknowledged for decades that carcinogens just increase the risk the more you add, even starting at very small amounts. But in any case, while these drinking water standards don't apply directly to a discharge, they give us kind of a basis for thinking about why such small levels would be a problem or should be stopped. So again, started getting data from some of these localities and then from DEQ. And there are three kinds of, or three places where PFAS has been sampled by different parties. In the effluent from these wastewater plants, whether it be a municipal sewage plant or an industry, the effluent is simply the water that goes out the pipe into the stream or into the water body. Influent, particularly for one of those publicly owned treatment works like the wastewater plant in your town, the influent is what comes into that system from all the different sources, whether it be commercial, industrial, residential. And then sludge is produced during the wastewater treatment plant processes, where they take out more solid type materials, which also carry with them certain kinds of pollutants. And then they dispose of those in some way. Some of those end up spread on the land in what we call, or what are popularly called biosolids, which are a form of sludge that have received some treatment, but not treatment that would remove PFAS or lots of other toxic chemicals. So those three media are where some people have been sampling for PFAS. When I looked at both results from a survey that DEQ sent out back in early 2022, and some of the responses that I got directly from some of the localities, this is the kind of population of data that was there. Publicly owned treatment works, again, owned by the municipalities or wastewater authority and serving the public, obviously. Industrial dischargers and water treatment plants, and not to be confused with the wastewater plants. These are the folks who do take water out of a stream or out of the groundwater, they treat it, and then they supply it to you in your homes and your businesses. Now, those water treatment plants, many of them have their own discharge because, again, they're removing things from the drinking water. They're removing pollutants or contaminants, and then those have to go somewhere. And many of those water treatment plants have their own discharges, so they have their own effluent. As far as the data that do exist, again, it is very limited. Even with those big numbers of potential sources that I just showed you, 145, 220, or 212, 37, even out of those, there's very little data that we've gotten so far. And the only reason we have that data is that the people who were running those facilities, the operators and the owners, took it on their own initiative to go do some sampling. And so got to give them credit. And when I get to the end of this presentation and show you some of the ones where they actually have found significant amounts of PFAS, you're going to see some names that pop up a number of times. That's not because they're the worst ones around. It's because they're the ones who took the trouble to go and do the sampling. Since the DEQ survey was distributed back in early 2022, and the results from that we acquired fairly recently, we don't know if many of those other people might have sampled since that time. And that's why we continue a process of trying to survey folks. We're making requests for data. And then if we can't get them through cooperation, we make, legal Freedom of Information Act request. But we're just continuing to build on that database. Even what is in the responses to DEQ surveys is very incomplete. For example, EPA recommends out of those thousands of forms of PFAS that it be a general practice to sample for about 40 of them. Well, in this survey, we don't get usually how many they sampled for. We don't get information about, all of the ones that are there. Sometimes it's only one form that they support or report. Sometimes it's a total of a number of separate types, but we don't really get the details that we would need. There again, where the municipalities have responded directly to us, we've gotten fuller reports, so we have a lot more information that we can share. And again, when we put out our report, kind of more fully talking about this stuff, we can share more of that. But in any case, we do have results from the different sources, from DEQ's survey and from other sources. And although it's not totally surprising, it's very concerning. We did have 21 of those POTWs that said, yes, we went and sampled our effluent, the water coming out our pipe, and 20 of 21 of those had significant concentrations of PFAS, some of them very high concentrations. If you compare, to the four for PFOA or PFAS, there were folks who had different constituents that were 100, 200, or much more in some cases. So what's that tell us? If we found, or if the people who have sampled already found PFAS in 20 of those 21 municipal plants, does that indicate that a lot more of those municipal plants have these chemicals? It's a fair inference to start with. We won't say that it's going to be that proportion, but the scientific literature is starting to come to the conclusion that it probably is, that PFAS is showing up in most municipal wastewater plants. In part, that's because a lot of these plants are receiving waste from industries that use or manufacture or have PFAS somewhere in their process so that it becomes a source. Some of these same people, same operators, looked at the influent coming into their plants. 19 of them were sampled, and every single one of those showed PFAS coming into their plants. Now, one interesting thing about what comes into a wastewater plant and what goes out into the stream is that you may find different levels and different combinations of those chemicals, those PFAS forms, all through the system. And so it's really a complex situation to figure out. But if we don't start really sharing the data, gathering more data, hopefully with the authority that the regulators have to make that happen, then we won't figure out these situations. The last thing I list there is that sludge. 8 of the facilities, the publicly owned facilities, did sample their sludge, and all 8 of them had very significant levels of PFAS. Again, some very high. And again, it's not surprising that if it is in the water that's flowing through that wastewater system, that it will be in the sludge, and very often will be concentrated significantly. So then we go to the industrial facilities. Again, as I told you, there were on the list that DEQ gave us, there were 212 industries listed. By the timestamps on the response, it appears that most of those industries responded in some way. We can't always tell because of the way that DEQ's data is put together exactly what those industries submitted and what they didn't. In any case, we did find 2 of those industries that had very, very high levels of PFAS. but those are the only two that said, yeah, we sampled that effluent. Um, on the other hand, there were 8 of them that said that they had PFAS compounds in their processes, their industrial processes, or in the products that they produce. So at the very least, those 8 are good candidates for likely sources of PFAS. And again, they may discharge directly to a water body, or they may be routing their wastewater into one of these publicly owned treatment works. And then finally, another question that was in DEQ's survey was about stormwater and the potential for stormwater coming off of these industrial sites being in contact with PFAS compounds and therefore maybe carrying them off the site. 20 of the facilities said, yeah, we have a situation like that where that's possible. So again, we don't have the direct evidence that PFAS is leaving those sites, but we have very strong suspicions or reason for concern. Then finally, the category of those water treatment plants. Not many of those had sampled. Of course, it's a much smaller set that was surveyed of 37. 5 of them said they had sampled, but there again, all 5 of them said or showed that they are discharging PFAS into the water bodies near them. But then many of them had also gone, again, like we say, upstream. They had looked at the water, what they call the source water, whether that's water that they are withdrawing from a reservoir or directly from a stream or whatever. 20 of them said, yeah, we've sampled those sources before it gets into our treatment works. And 13 of them showed that they had pretty significant levels of PFAS. And if they had it coming in and they didn't measure it, what goes out of that effluent, then that seems a real concern. There's not necessarily a reason to assume that it's not going to be coming out there. Of course, some of that may also be going to our homes and our businesses and serving us, because a lot of these facilities really aren't treating for these substances. So that's kind of the layout of what we have. And again, I mean, the first title on this webinar was knowns and unknowns. And I just want to be very clear that this is a very small set of what we need to know. So that's one of the biggest messages here, is that it's really a shame that we haven't figured more of this out, that either more of the responsible parties haven't gone and done the same thing that some of these wastewater operators did, do the sampling on their own. If more have done it, then we'll find that out. But at the same time, the most important thing is for DEQ, who is supposed to control every one of these discharges. They have a duty and authority under state and federal law to figure out if there are dangerous pollutants in these discharges, to require sampling to figure out the amounts and the characteristics, and then to require that anything that would be discharged be removed before it gets into our waters, before it gets into our streams and our fish and down into our water supplies. Now, if you've been paying attention to news in the last several years in Virginia, there have been a number of places where it has PFAS have shown up in very significant amounts in people's drinking water. It's been found in fish, places like the Chickahominy Basin, in very high levels. And so it is just so imperative that we continue to build out this picture, that we figure out what is there, what's being released, and then we stop it. And especially important is that DEQ, who has any of this data, that they be sharing it with us and explaining it to all of us. to our communities, to our groups. But I will just say that if they're not going to do it, that's why we did what we did here, because they had not released this information to a wider public. The health department and the DEQ have created some website material or resources with data for some of the water supplies and some of the streams and fish tissue. But this is one part that's just not been there. And when we asked DEQ about that, they just said, you know, well, we think there are some data out there for discharges, but we're not really able to tell you the magnitude or all the sources of it. That's not acceptable. This is just a quick view of some of the spread of POT discharges that have significant amounts of PFAS. You'll notice that all that left side of the state, all the way down into the southwest, much of the Valley of Virginia, we don't see anything. That doesn't mean it's not there. That just means that the dischargers who are in those areas, we don't know. We don't have data. And either they have not collected it, or it was not collected at the time that this data was being first compiled. But even that shows you that it's not rare. This just represents those POTWs. It does not represent some of those other discharges. And again, I felt like it made sense to just go ahead and throw up some of the places that reported having significant amounts. But again, I'll reiterate that these aren't necessarily some bad guys that have done something wrong. In fact, they're folks who have gone out and taken the initiative to try to figure out what's happening. And what we at Wild Virginia have said publicly, and what we've said to these municipal authorities, is we want to work with you. These materials are coming into your systems. You're going to have to figure out what's there and how to deal with it. And the best way to do that is for the public to get involved to support that effort. So don't take this as a shaming list. That's not what it's intended to be. But I thought it might be a first chance for some folks to look and see, well, that's in my area. I live in Arlington, or I'm in Fredericksburg or Williamsburg area. Just to give you a little context. The water treatment plants listed there, ones that said they had found PFAS in the effluent that they discharge. And then finally, those two industrial dischargers. The DuPont plant discharges directly to the James River. That IR engraving actually discharges into a wastewater plant, one owned by Henrico. So while its waste, which is pretty large, is not going directly into surface waters, it's going through a wastewater plant for which we have not yet seen any data. And again, I can't say that Henrico wastewater treatment plant has not collected data, but we haven't found it. Before I get into questions, just want to remind you, once you registered for this webinar, you're on our mailing list as long as you want to stay there. You will get a follow-up email, and we're going to continue to try to help people be informed, but also to figure out how we can join our voices together to push the DEQ and the federal EPA to make sure that we get more of this data, and that we figure out this problem in much greater extent, and that we stop it. So look out for that. Again, the webinar is being recorded. We'll give you the link for that. Please feel free to share it to whoever you think might be interested. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Go look at the Q&A section here. See if there's anything that I can answer. Okay. Looks like, okay. I'm looking at chat actually. So I'm going to start at the end because that's easier, and then I'll just work my way back. The state issues a toxic release inventory with the Radford Arsenal at the top. Yeah, that toxic release inventory is something that they're required to do under federal law. And it actually includes all kinds of releases, air and water releases from all kinds of different sources. But I do happen to know a bit about the Radford Arsenal, and it is a very significant releaser of toxics. Now, I do not know specifically about PFAS from them, but it's something to look into. Going back again. DuPont. Okay, again about the arsenal. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out if there's something that I can answer here. I mentioned DuPont, of course. Yeah, the question is all the info from 2022, all the info that was in the DEQ surveys from 2022, some of the stuff that, for example, the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority, they gave us data that went all the way up into 2023, later in 2023. And then more recently, we got some information from Arlington Wastewater Treatment Plant. And I think it's a little bit later. But we're going to have to do a bunch of work to figure out where we stand now and figure out where other things are. I'm going back down here. My Glenmore community is listed. Who can I ask for more info on that? You can ask me to start with, because I do have more info. And again, one thing you can do is you can look out for the report that we're gonna release, because obviously I could only get so much, can only go through so much in a presentation like this. But I can give you more information, but then, you know, whoever your wastewater authority is, they can certainly help you also. What range or orders of magnitude of PFAS detected in biosolids and industrial discharges qualifies it as significant or very, very high? Good question. First of all, as I started, I consider above the detection limits in water itself to be significant. As far as very, very high, what I've seen in some places in the tens of thousands of parts per trillion. That you know, that is to me, and from the literature that I've looked at, that should qualify as very high. You know, we can talk about what you know, advisories there are and how they're set. But again, these are materials that aren't supposed to be in the environment, simply. So I start from that. We can always get into details as to levels. And that's one of the things the state's going to have to do too. They're going to have to eventually set water quality criteria for surface water for some of these materials. There needs to be monitoring of that sludge, those biosolids, and we're going to have to figure out what's acceptable there. To me, if it's going on my land or the land of my neighbor, and it may be running off into my well or my spring, then I would rather there not be any measurable amounts there. Is it reasonable to expect water treatment to remove all PFAS? It is, I think, technically possible and reasonable to remove PFAS down to a non-detectable level. You know, like with a lot of these chemicals, there may be minute, really minute amounts that we can't even measure at this point, but we get better on those things. And as we get better on those, we can continue to reduce the levels more and more. Some of the treatment options, granular activated carbon, reverse osmosis, can work very effectively under certain circumstances. Again, when it comes to a water treatment plant where it is hopefully relatively cleaner water to begin with, before it goes into a treatment system, that's a different circumstance from sewage coming into a plant and then needing to be cleaned up. So those are details that are going to have to be figured out. But that's another part of the analysis that the DEQ is supposed to do, is they're supposed to look at, are there technology-based requirements that we can put into these permits that are doable and realistic with technology that's available. We don't have to figure all that out. You know, those are steps down the line that need to be done. Okay, I'm hopping back and forth because I see things popping up down at the bottom. Okay. Sorry. Do any of the new EPA PFAS rules or new Virginia PFAS monitoring laws from the last session add monitoring requirements? The drinking water rules, the new standards, will require water suppliers, drinking water suppliers, to be monitoring these things. Some of this stuff gets phased in over time. So not all of those requirements are going to start immediately. As far as sampling for wastewater discharges or industrial discharges, the legislation that went through in Virginia last year did not at all start that right away. What it did is it said, when somebody has measured their water supply and when they found a problem, there's going to be a process to start that move to identify sources. But it did not take that step that frankly should have been or should start now. And there didn't need to be legislation to start that. That's one of the things that we keep stressing to DEQ and to others. Okay, DEQ's report on the Middle Chickahominy shows equations they use to calculate health screening levels. Okay, yeah. One thing that we have heard is that there may well, or there likely is supposed to be some kind of fish advisory for PFOS coming out of the health department. That was told to one of our allies very recently. So yeah, there are ways to figure out these numbers, these limits. But if it's not precautionary, if it does not recognize that reality that I was saying, that we shouldn't be releasing any of this stuff if we can help it, any measurable amounts, then there's a problem with it. Can legal action be taken against those exceeding the MCL? Again, that's going to be for those drinking water suppliers, that's going to be under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And yes, there are requirements and there are potential penalties that can apply there. But again, those things are being phased in. So just because somebody is exceeding an MCL today doesn't mean that they're going to be liable for that from the regulators today. Can DEQ be taken to court for not enforcing the law? Yes, they can. One thing that they can be challenged, individual permits that they issue that don't require the appropriate limits and monitoring can be challenged in court. And that is something that I know our group and others have been thinking about for some time, to, where that option is going to be viable and where the best chance to do that. We would rather convince them to do it what they know should be done, but we haven't gotten there yet. And this again is about effective treatment and how expensive. Again, there are viable treatment options out there. For example, the Roanoke, Western Virginia Water Authority, through no fault of theirs, they got quite a bit of PFAS in their drinking water reservoir, and they very, very soon implemented a new treatment system for the drinking water, and are effectively taking that PFAS out. As far as the prices, I'm not an authority on the different economic factors. Yeah, in some cases it's going to be expensive. I'm not going to question that. But here again, that's one reason that when we're talking about these municipalities who are receiving these chemicals through no fault of their own in general, they're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And we're their customers, we're their taxpayers. And so we need to be informed, and we need to be supporting the right kinds of requirements. Okay. Looking at the thing about biosolids and the DEQ folks. The people who get sludge on their land, they get a brochure from about 2015. They're not updated with warnings on PFAS and chemicals present in the sludge. I didn't know that it was 2015, but it does not surprise me. The very fact is that not only are they not acknowledging and looking for the PFAS in that sludge, that's one of quite a number of chemicals that they have refused to grapple with through time. But yes, they're very, very far behind on that. And that is another place where they certainly have the authority to be requiring monitoring and requiring actions to, prohibit those kinds of releases to the environment now. Some other states have taken forceful action, and some other places, citizen groups have taken action to really stop some of that sludge contamination on land. How does the new EPA CERCLA designation as toxics change the enforcement options? It doesn't change their options for operating under the Clean Water Act or the State Water Control Law. I'll simply say that the acknowledgement now that some of these things are toxic chemicals under that federal law should make it even more serious and more obvious that they need to do what they can to keep these things from being discharged. But as far as a technical or legal specific tie, I don't think that's there. And then as far as cleaning up PFAS, is it not true that PFAS accumulates in the soil from many years of sludge? It accumulates wherever it can bind to particles, wherever it can accumulate in bodies, all that kind of thing. So yes, that's the reason that we have to be worried about very low levels in the water, in the waste, because it will build up. And why is Virginia not taking DEQ to court now? We are actively looking at what the viability for a lawsuit is. when you do that kind of thing, you got to make sure you have the best case, and you got to make sure you have the resources to carry it forward. We are not shy about litigation, and we are serious about pushing DEQ to do the right thing. So just stay tuned on that. Not going to make any predictions, but we're not going to rest without DEQ stepping up and doing its job. And I'm just going back up to see, did I miss anything with, oh, there's Q&A. I hadn't jumped into there for a while. Okay. Are home water filters effective in removing PFAS? Again, that's not one of the things I'm most knowledgeable about, but the last thing I read indicated that some of the kind of basic carbon filters with the pitchers and those kinds of things aren't necessarily doing the whole job. But I think there are solutions out there that are considered to be pretty effective. Has shipping, which has such an enormous presence in Hampton Roads, been implicated in contributing to the PFAS levels? The simple fact is I don't know. There are classes of industries, categories of industries that EPA has laid out that are likely sources of PFAS because of the kinds of materials they use, the kind of products they make. I suspect there are things in that whole big operation of shipbuilding that may well be significant sources of PFAS, but I can't tell you, real details about that. But again, that's why we need to be looking. One of the things that we and other groups have done is to file comments with DEQ on specific permits and said, hey, this wastewater plant receives waste from an industry that's on that list. It almost certainly has PFAS. So you need to go look. And DEQ, so in almost every case, has refused to do that. We've also seen where some of those industries directly discharge. And in the same way, DEQ has been resistant to requiring the kind of monitoring we need. Okay, let me see. Are there some near timelines to be aware of for public comment? The answer is yes. And one of the things I'm going to include in a follow-up, like I say, we're going to release this report, but we have started to try to put a bit of pressure on EPA because they have oversight authority of DEQ. If DEQ's permits are not legally acceptable, if they don't live up to the minimums of the Clean Water Act, then they can veto those permits. And we've already asked them to do that in one case. We intend to continue to put pressure on them to do their jobs. And so I think that's one place where having folks weigh in would be very useful. EPA has shown they have sent comments to DEQ. They have urged them to do better, but we need more than suggestions. We need them to hold that line. And so, yes, keep in touch with us. We'll be giving you ideas on things to do. And when we suggest that people do make comments to a permit or a regulation, we always try to give you the kind of framework and the kind of suggestions on not only technically, here's how you go about it, but here are some of the ideas you might want to address. And then EWG, which is Environmental Working Group, has reviewed home filter devices. Several removed 100% PFAS. That's great. Some did not, like Brita and Pure. So yeah, Environmental Working Group. First of all, they've got a lot of information on PFAS on things like military bases. You mentioned, shipbuilding, but military bases have been a source where we've had a lot of contamination in groundwater, on the ground, and in water. So yeah, check out Environmental Working Group. It's a great source. I don't think I missed any. If I did, um, just as I say, we'll follow up. We're up to 7:56, so I don't want to keep people over time, but you will see that follow-up email. You'll see our suggestions on things going forward. Yeah, came in late. You will get a copy of the link for the recording. And yeah, everybody, please share that if there's anybody in your community and your groups that you think would be interested. And again, just realize this is just a start of us kind of revealing information. There should be more for us to reveal, and we won't stop until we get it. So thanks everybody for being here. Really appreciate your attendance, and stick with us. Follow us through the email. Okay.